I'm Danny Gregory. I'm a writer and an artist and the founder of Sketchbook Skool. I'm joined by my friend. Go ahead, John. Introduce yourself.
Hi there. I'm John Muir. I'm a scientist with a sketchbook.
I like that. I like that you come up with a different way of describing yourself each week. Yeah. Scientist with a sketchbook. Cool. Good. Well, today's theme is authenticity. And we are going to talk about all kinds of aspects of what authenticity means relevant to art. We're going to talk about forgery. We're going to talk about style. We're going to talk about finding our voice. We're going to give you advice on how to use the influences that are affecting your art. We're going to talk about what it is to be a beginning artist and what it is to be a mature artist. And we're going to talk about artists who we admire and artists who have gone through creative changes, either inspired by the people who influence them or to step away from those influences and all the various other things. It should be an interesting conversation. Authenticity. Are you ready?
I'm looking forward to it.
All right, let's do it. All right. Nice to see you again.
It's really good to see you too.
Yeah. I'm enjoying doing this, and I'm finding that more and more people seem to be finding it, particularly on YouTube. YouTube seems to be the place for this audio only experience for some strange reason. But
the audio only experience with visuals.
right, exactly.
We make it so exciting by being here.
Sitting here with, well, people like to watch middle-aged men sit and stare at their computer screens. You know, this makes for good
I find
video.
I just miss being around people so much
Mm-hmm.
that I'm really hungry for opportunities for conversation, opportunities to um, any even even being with people virtually. I know it's not the same, but I guess I'm a social primate. um, I miss being with the troop.
Yep. Yep. We're all stuck in our own monkey trees right now. We can't play in the veldt, but that will
That's
come.
right. We can't play in the veldt, but fortunately, we have these two tin cans and the long string between my tree and your tree, and so here we are.
Here we are.
I think that gets a visual
There we go. Two
in
can.
my little kind of note taking here. I'm going to have our two monkeys in my sketch notes um, with their tin cans.
Monkeys with tin cans. Yes. So, um, the topic that we picked to talk about today is authenticity. And we just kind of shared that word, but we haven't really talked about what it means. And we
That's what
haven't
I thought
talked.
would be kind of fun about this. That we have a topic, but probably my interpretation of what that is going to be authentically different than yours.
Possibly to each his own. So yes, so let's talk about. Why don't you start? Because I know what I think about it. So I don't know what you think about it. What do you?
Okay.
Why did you think authenticity was an interesting topic to talk about? And what's it got to do with art? Are we talking about like an authentic Rembrandt, or what are we talking about?
Well, I mean, the thinking about forgeries is really interesting because people who can make a really good forgery are amazing artists. I think that what's gone astray is that for me, story is really important, and
Mhm.
history and story, and the process of how something came about for me is a part of experiencing the thing. And so if if, let's say there's a piece of art that is claiming to be one thing but really came about by another process, to me that kind of misses the point. Um, there was um, a, a person who painted amazing forgeries. I think of Vermeer's, um, and then sold those to the Nazis to help him survive during World War II, and also to kind of satiate part of the Nazis' lust for getting their hands on on all the great art, um, and was so good at that that it sold art to, I think, Goering. Um, so
It was a Dutch guy, wasn't it? It was a Dutch guy, I
I think
think.
that's right. I think that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah.
And at first, the people are saying like, you were a collaborator, you were selling art to the Nazis. But then he proved that like, no, I was selling them forgeries to kind of get their eye off the ball, and so then becomes a national hero. Um, I think that the story behind that is I would personally, if I could have a piece in my collection, the one with that story rather than the Vermeer. I mean, that story is beautiful. The story of that forgery is amazing. But I think what is sad though is when um, like as a geologist goes out, they collect a rock. The rock they have to keep track of where it was found. Like what is the structure that you have brought this out of? What layer in the earth? Because otherwise, it's just a stone. Because it's if you remove it from its context, it's just it's just a stone. But if you have it in context, then it's data. If you sort of know that this was found here in this layer, this far down, next to these other sorts of things, you've got all your sort of notes of how that looked. That rock then becomes a really useful tool for helping understand the history of the Earth. But otherwise, it's just a stone. So
So
it
if,
turns.
yeah, so for you, authenticity is not just judging a work of art on the surface, but understanding the context, the story. That's
Yeah,
that
so that,
dimension
that
of it.
that's one part of it, and then the sort of my artistic authenticity is a whole different discussion, which I think we're also going to get into. But first, just sort of thinking about like the piece of art itself. I love looking at people's sketches. What are the sketches behind making a painting? Um, and when they do, uh, I don't know if it's X-rays or some other process of looking into canvases to see what was what were some of the sort of the false starts in making something. Like there's a story there, and I love the story.
Right.
And so I
So
guess that the tragedy of the forgery is that you end up you if it's done really really well, you end up with a story that doesn't really connect to the past of that piece of canvas or paper.
it's a lie that when you dissect it, falls apart.
Yeah, and I'm not so much worried about being lied to,
But to
but
see,
more.
but I think yeah, but I think you're distracted. In other words, you think you're learning a thing, you think you're coming upon a story that then turns out to be a fiction, and it's harder to learn from a fiction sometimes unless it's got a universal truth to it, I guess. But I think if
Yeah,
you look at something, if you look at a Vermeer, an authentic Vermeer, and that is within the context of what was Vermeer doing at that time, what is Vermeer's role in art history, how did he affect other artists who followed him, what does this say about life in his day, because he was obviously a documenter of everyday life, all these kinds of things. And then if it's a forgery, you say, well, none of those things that I figured out from that, looking at that work of art, are actually useful because they're not true. It's not.
but but then there's this other story there of this person who created the forgery, and what went with that? What was going on there? That's what I would want to find out.
To
That
some extent, I mean, the guy who you cite, this Dutchman, is, to some extent. I mean, I don't think that he was politically motivated. I think he was still a thief who was trying
Yeah,
to get
probably.
money. Right. So it seemed like, I mean, it'd be interesting if, in fact, rather than post rationalizing it, it turned out that that actually was what he was doing. He was like an art guerrilla who was going in and, you know, sort of subverting the system and had this whole agenda for doing it. That might have been interesting. That's probably not what he was doing, but still, yeah,
Yeah,
that is
and
interesting.
but with history we get to, because there's so much time and space and interpretation between sort of now and then. We will never know, or probably never know.
Right. But let's talk about the more interesting, to me, more interesting at least, aspect of authenticity, which is how authenticity affects. Oops, should we pause?
Apologize.
Yeah. So I was saying, authenticity is something that I think is a factor in all art and in learning about art, and is sort of a different kettle of fish than whether a particular work of art's history is authenticity, whether its
Mhm.
provenance is authentic.
Yeah,
That's
for
sort of
us as
interesting.
makers, the other kind of
Yeah.
authenticity is that's where the rubber meets the road.
Right. So
I agree.
what does that mean to you, that aspect of authenticity?
Well, the I uh, I think people talk about it in several different ways. One is that a um, I guess the idea that you have, that there is something inside you that is an expression of your sort of deepest self, and that's somehow going to come out on the paper, and that if you are following that fire, then what you do is authentic. Um, and if you get derailed from that by starting uh, to mimic somebody else, or do it for a motivation other than the intrinsic drive, that this is somehow inauthentic. But I don't really see it that way. I think that, for at least for my personal experience, the artist that I am is a hodgepodge of all of these ideas that are coming in from all over the culture, and from the works of other people who inspire me. And I I I voraciously scavenge these ideas. I have a little notebook, and I'll jot down like any good idea that I hear. I will want to hang on to that to turn into something that I might then sort of repurpose and reuse. So a lot of my ideas are not ones that somehow organically originally sprung from some John Muir Laws well. But I feel like I am, so rather than being a well, I feel like I am a stream moving along with all sorts of really useful tributaries coming into it, giving me all sorts of ideas and inspiration. So, what is authentically me? Is that a picture of a bird done in the field? Well, perhaps, but is that, derivative of Tunnicliffe? Is that derivative of William D. Barry or anybody else who I've studied that inspires me? Yeah, probably. Um, but when things come into you and then come out through a creative process, it goes through the filter that is you. And so I am going to be able to create something that is different than these people who inspire me. But there is there's a link and a connection, though, in all those things with those sources of inspiration. Did that make any sense?
No, I've completely followed with you. Um, I think I have a slightly different point of view. I think in part because I don't know that me is completely separate separatable, if that's a word, from influences. Like influences have helped make me. You
Hmm.
know, I mean, I have exposed myself to other people's ideas for as long as I've been able to think, whether it was my parents' ideas or books that I've read or teachers that I've had or all these things, they all helped to create me. And so I don't feel like derivative is a really inappropriate word because I feel like it's derived perhaps from all these things or it's influenced by them or it's affected by them. But I'm standing on the shoulders of giants to some extent, but also
Hmm.
like everybody, um, I'm a creature of my time. And I wonder if it's different if your goal as an artist is to explore yourself and to, kind of dig deeper into who you are with the hopes that when you make something, other people will find some aspect of themselves in it. Right. I think that's what a lot of art tries to do is to say,
Say that again. So,
okay, so if I make art that is um, somehow channeling how I feel about the world or how I see the world,
hmm.
or what I've experienced, and then you look at it and it resonates with you because you see either similarity or it throws into relief some feeling that you have, it makes you feel and think about yourself. I think that that is, to me, a large part of the point. And it could just be as simple as Cezanne looks at a bowl of fruit and sees it in a certain way. And I think, oh, like I haven't seen that way before, but I could see why that is how I could see that way. And in the future, when I look at a bowl of fruit or at anything, I will be affected by what Cezanne did to me. That to me is part of the process. So it's kind of like it's in me. I put it on paper. You look at it, and it resonates with something inside of you. So that it is a form of communication that is purely subjective. That's its purpose. That to
Oh,
me is different than perhaps what, say, scientific illustration is meant to accomplish, which could be that all that stuff gets in the way. It's kind of like if you're a detective, or a journalist or a doctor or a scientist, you're not supposed to be subjective. You're supposed to be trustworthy because you're completely objective in what you're doing. And that the art you make, if you make a drawing of a bird, that's what that damn bird looked like. I don't care who you looked at. I don't care that you looked at Audubon or whoever. I want to know that you are drawing the bird as it really is. This is not an opportunity for self-expression. But I don't know if is that ever true, or else take a photo.
yeah. Let me just sort of play with those ideas a little bit. This is okay. We're getting fun here because I wanted to pick up on both the idea that um, is somebody looking at that artwork that you made and then having their own sort of experience off of that? Is that an essential part of the process of art? Or if I just put it in my sketchbook and put that up on my shelf, and I had this experience of connection with the world while being out there in the field through making that sketch of the curlew. Um, and then I close the book and I never share it with anybody. And it sits there on my shelf. Um, there we've removed the whole part of it that is for somebody else's consumption, if you will.
Unless somebody else is future you.
So what if I never look at it again? But the process of doing that forced me in that moment to uh, to be still, to pay attention to deeper levels of beauty and wonder in the world. And then before I left the field, I was chased by the hippopotamus and it swallowed my sketchbook. The that artwork will never be seen again. I've had a sketchbook float down a river um, that I didn't want to dive in after. And but the experience of creating that is still intrinsically mine. Um, so I guess I don't know if for the
But
art
isn't it
process to be complete, if it has to be filtered through a viewer, myself, or another at another time. That
okay? But it
just
was transformative in either case.
yes,
It was
yes,
transformative, right? So the process of making this piece of art made you engage differently with the outside world. It transformed you. It changed you in some way. It's a story, right? That's
yes,
your story of
yes.
change and growth. And so, therefore, that whether it's with present you, future you, or somebody completely else, it's the same kind of thing. As opposed to if your goal was purely objective, like I want to make sure that I get this completely accurately, that this drawing completely accurately reflects this bird, and I don't want anything inside of the fact that I had like a fight with my wife this morning, or the fact that this bird reminds me of a bird that pooped on my car 3 weeks ago.
That
It doesn't make me
rascal.
think about any of those things. I'm just being a camera essentially here.
But
Now I think you could
but
do
but, but
that. Yeah, go ahead.
well, but I'm thinking even for the scientific illustrator. The scientific illustrator is so different than a camera because even if I am trying to render something as clearly as I can, I the what makes that so like the camera with a 500 megapixels or whatever it is, each one of those is kind of opening up. I'm gonna like it's gonna get it's equally weighting all the information in front of you. But what the illustrator does is looks at something, and the illustrator is deciding, I want to communicate a specific thing. I want to communicate a specific thing here. And what is that? Maybe that thing is what is the plumage of this bird when it is in a relaxed pose. Maybe it is postures taken while displaying, right? So there's a specific thing that you want to show, and you're leaving stuff out, and you're putting, and the choices, you're making all these choices of what you put in and what you leave out, and that's what makes for a effective illustration. If you put everything in with equal weight, then it's much more of a confusing image to look at. One of the most famous sort of modern day bird illustrators is David Allen Sibley. And Sibley's stroke, well, one of Sibley's, I think that guy is a crazy genius. But one of the things that he did that was brilliant is in his drawings of birds for his field guide, they are rendered as you might see the bird from about 20 feet away. So all the like, it's got this little feather and this little feather and this little feather and this little feather and here, all this little detail that when you get at a distance you don't see. If you're putting all that information into the illustration, as most illustrators do, because we're sitting there and there's a study skin of the dead bird on our table, and so we're drawing it at that distance. But then that becomes a little bit more abstracted as you back up from the thing. Sibley's leaving all this information that he absolutely has the ability to technically render all that stuff, but he's choosing not to. And that makes his illustrations much more useful for getting a sense of the gestalt of the bird, the sort of the general feeling of it. Um,
Yeah, but that brings us back to authenticity, because you could say that the more technical illustrator who is rendering all those details is in a way being inauthentic, because they're creating a drawing that appears to be something that was done in the field, seeing a bird on a tree, but in fact wasn't created that way, right? Whereas what you're describing about Sibley is that he's making something that feels authentic, in that it was maybe created in the same environment in which we're looking at the bird ourselves, right? Do you see the distinction I'm making? That like when the way in which we make something, we hide that in order to make it seem like something else, that is a bit inauthentic.
well, I think it just depends on. But let me just sort of give another example of one of my kind of heroes of bird illustration. Tunnicliffe um, is a person who there are sketchbooks filled of sort of loose sketches of birds. But what Tunnicliffe also did is made what he called measured drawings, where he'd take a dead bird, put it on his easel, and just feather by feather render the bejeebers out of this, and often in several different angles with the wing spread and the wing tucked in. They're just these masterpieces of, and he's using little calipers to make sure that every little part is the right length. And for the purposes of making this document of here is the plumage of this bird in all of its detail, it's a different goal. But I would say that it is equally authentic. I I guess I would challenge the idea of inauthentic art.
You mean the whole idea of it?
The whole idea of inauthentic art.
Okay.
Um, because I mean, people say like, well, what if somebody's just doing something for commercial purposes? Well, that's what they're doing, and people can make something that is commercial, that is artistically masterful. Like
Right.
I remember when when I was little, there was an advertisement that came on television for Apple computers, and had there was a giant room filled of people, sort of in some sort of silent reverie in a huge hall with there was a picture, essentially Big Brother, projected on the wall in front of them, and a woman comes sprinting in with a giant hammer and throws the hammer through this, um, and that's what was how they introduced Apple computers to us. And it is it's visually stunning and compelling, and it's done for um, a commercial purpose. But I would say that that was if it was just done in a film festival, people would look at it and say like, oh, that was a wonderful scene that you created. But the fact that it's in a commercial, then people go like, oh no, well that's just that can't be art. But I'd say even that I'm going to count in my art book, and I'd say it's that what is I could say what would be an example of something that is inauthentic.
Okay. Well, let me talk to that because I haven't really given you my explanation of
Okay,
authenticity
good.
yet.
Well, I'm sorry
Yeah.
for monologuing then.
No, I mean, I think look, that commercial, which is called 1984, is the launch of the Macintosh. Is is it artistic or not? I certainly think that there are pieces of commercial art, and in commercial art, you can include illustration because you can say, I'm
Hmm.
not just talking about an ad, but I could be talking about an illustration for a magazine article or an illustration in a book. Those are also pieces of drawing or painting that were made by an artist who is being paid to do it
Yeah.
and who's being given um, instructions, to various degrees of detail about what was expected of him. So it wasn't like go and do a drawing.
Or
In
her.
most cases, it's we need you to draw the 2020 Jeep Wrangler, and we need it to be on top of a mountain and it's backlit, and we want you to make it yellow, and all these various rules that will be applied the illustrator will be working within. Does that make it authentic? Not really, but it doesn't make it an authentic piece of art in that it's entirely the artist's point of view. It is a collaboration with whoever the client wants. I've made art like that. I mean, I've made first of all, I spent 30 years in advertising, so I've made many commercials, and I've made commercials that were had varying degrees of authenticity. I've made commercials that were based on stories in my life. So I've taken a story of something that actually happened to me and I've made it into a Super Bowl commercial, let's say. I've done that kind of a thing. I've also made commercials that were completely made up and inauthentic or completely not real. The fact is that generally advertising that is authentic, that ties to an actual human experience, an actual human emotion, tends to be more persuasive. So it's
Hmm.
generally better advertising. It's often very difficult for that kind of message to make its way through the labyrinth of corporate approvals. So that's why you end up seeing a lot of advertising that isn't particularly authentic, that feels totally contrived. And you say, well, nobody ever would behave that way. Nobody ever would look that way. Nobody would ever live that way. I can't really relate to it on that level. But good advertising has a kernel of truth in it, just like good, you know, art of any kind does, where you say, okay, yeah, like I totally relate to that part of it. And generally, you know, when I worked in advertising, that's what we wanted to do is we wanted you to say, like, I get it. I, I get what the story is you're telling. I relate to it. And therefore, when you give me a message of what you would like me to actually do as a result of seeing the story, I'm willing to do it or to entertain it because I feel like I'm talking to somebody who gets it and understands me. That's not really what I was talking about with authenticity. I find that I struggle with authenticity in part because I spent 30 years in advertising. So when you work in advertising, you know, the motivation for doing a lot of what you're doing is because somebody's paying you or because somebody told you to do it, you know, and there are rules that are set up and they are overseen by, you know, your boss and your boss's boss and your client and all these other people. They're all intruding in this experience. And ultimately, you're doing it to deliver something that meets everybody's expectations. So, in general, that kind of way of creating is less what I would call authentic than an artist sitting down with a blank piece of paper and pouring their heart out. You know, and I find like when I write things, there are times where those muscles that I developed over those years of advertising, even though I haven't done it for a decade or so, they they are atrophied, but they're not gone. You know, and I write marketing materials for Sketchbook Skool. You know, I write stuff to promote my books. There's lots of opportunities that I have to sell stuff, and there are times when I can ride the gear that moves me into further and further inauthenticity, where my goal is to get you to do something. It's not just to communicate how I feel, it's to get you to do something. And I can be varying degrees of heavy handedness in doing that. And I would say that to me is inauthentic. So if I created a piece of art, which is like propaganda of some kind, was trying to get you to do something, the degree to which I'm trying to force you to do it, and I will cajole you and use anything at my disposal to convince you, that veers into inauthenticity. If I honestly don't really care what you think, that would be more authentic. You know, it's not that I don't want to engage with you, but I'm going to lay it out. This is the way I see it. And if you don't agree with me, I don't really care. That's fine. You know, that doesn't undo the reason that I'm doing it. So I find that what I wrestle with is, can I be authentic, or am I going to slide into, and I think things like social media make us inauthentic too, because we can say, what are the pieces of art that I make and put on Instagram that are going to get likes? You know, I think musicians wrestle with this. If you're a band that makes a certain kind of music, I was just reading an interview or a piece written by a musician who's a successful musician. His name is Nick Cave, and he wrote this piece about how they had created a new band, an album that he said a lot of our fans are not going to like it. But this is the
Yeah.
piece of music that we felt. This is the kind of music we felt we wanted to do right now. And if it's not for you, totally get it. I understand. You expected a certain thing from us. Now we're doing this other thing. If we had continued to do the thing that you're used to, that you like, well, that wouldn't be authentic to us. That's not what we want to do as artists right now. If you respond to us as artists and you want us to do our thing, whatever form it is, and you're going to find some pleasure in it, then great. Then you'll like this new album. You know, so I think that is, you know, that's that anyway. That's what I'm thinking about right now.
So if we're creating something because we feel, for whatever reason, we should, whether we're being paid for that or we feel that that is what our audience prefers, you're saying that that is then a sort of a lower level of inoff of authenticity.
I think it's the contractual obligations album. It's the, the musician who never varies what they do. I mean, I know a lot of illustrators who became well known for doing a certain style of illustration and they never stopped doing it. Why? Because their agents basically said to them, look, this is what people are hiring you to do. If you suddenly start doing some other thing, they're not going to be, they may or may not hire you. So if getting hired is your objective in being an illustrator, then be careful that you don't suddenly start doing something completely else. And I don't think that's just true of illustrators. I mean, there have been examples of artists who have radically changed the direction of their art, fine artists, and suddenly the tide turned against them. The critics turned against them. Yeah,
Yeah, when Bob Dylan started playing electric guitar, his
exactly,
fans booed him.
exactly.
Um, the but if I am creating art and my goal is behind that is persuasion. Um, so I am trying to create this piece of art to move um, move sort of somebody's sort of internal decision making ticker a little bit towards well, it doesn't have to be towards buying something. It could be maybe more towards compassion, maybe more towards um, accepting somebody who's different than they are. But it could be something that I feel is a not just sort of an economic gain for me, but something that I'm deliberately using my art, be it music, be it visual, spoken word, whatever it is, to influence people. Are you saying that
No, no, that's completely authentic. That's
that's
perfectly
completely
fine.
authentic? Okay.
No, no, no. I think so. I think my point was just, let's say I want to sell you a T-shirt, and so I do a drawing of a flower because I know that flowers have done well on T-shirt design.
Put a bird on it. Yeah.
Right. So I that's why I'm doing it. I don't really want to draw flowers. I don't really want to draw birds. I want to sell you a T-shirt because I want to make some money because I want to buy myself another Porsche. And so what I'm thinking about is like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to act like I'm doing it because I like drawing birds on flowers. However, my motivation and my feeling is that at
Okay.
best, there's going to be something in that art that betrays what your real agenda is. But even more profoundly, I think you're going to feel crappy because you're not going to be getting the pleasure out of making this art that you're making because you're doing it for some other reason. So that could affect it. Or may not, may not. You may not. You may
Oh,
enjoy doing it, but yeah.
okay. Then I guess what I think that perhaps my resistance is on sort of purely a semantic level.
Okay.
Um, the idea of authenticity versus inauthenticity. I think that somebody who is doing something because they authentically want to be able to feed their family, right? And so it's a means to an end, and um, but I would say that that person is just as authentic in what they're doing. So if I change the word to authentic, from authentic to what inspires you, what brings you alive, um, versus not the in his poem Sweet Darkness, David Whyte writes, anything or anyone that does not bring you alive is too small for you. Um, and that idea, I think, is kind of at the core of what we're talking about here. If you're doing something and it doesn't bring you alive, yes, you are not going to grow from it in the same way. You are not going um, to be able to the it's a diminished experience. Sometimes we do these things because we want to put bread on the table. Um, and I think that the things that motivate us. Um, I guess the idea that there are, um, you'd say like the motivation of making money, um, is inauthentic. But
No,
then
no,
if
no,
you
no,
kind of
no, no. You're misunderstanding me. I'm not
okay, I
saying
think
that.
I'm misunderstanding.
I'm not saying that doing something to make money is necessarily going to make authentic art. I don't mean that at all. I mean, if you have a feeling in your heart of what really matters to you and what you want to express, but you don't do it that way
Mm, mm,
because
mm.
it would, um, in some way impact your ability to make a living. Or similarly, if you decide I'm going to change the art I make because this is what's popular. I don't particularly like it. It doesn't really resonate with me, but I can figure out how to do it. So I'm going to do that. That would be inauthentic. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it might make you successful, but it isn't necessarily authentic. And I think people who value authenticity will see through it. Here's another take on this because I think we've gotten into the weeds a little bit about this. But I
Well, I
think,
do like these weeds, but I think that I think we are sort of fairly on the same page, but maybe it's just the term of authenticity. Um, but I like what you're saying about how, like, if you're not if you're doing this thing and it's not the thing that brings you alive, it can be absolutely a trap, a creative trap, where you're sort of the calories that you have for expending in creative ventures then just get squandered in this thing that does not bring you further alive.
yeah, it's like exactly. I mean, I think if making art that flows out of you and who you are and everything you've experienced, that brings us joy. Um,
Yes.
but
Yes.
if you say, I really shouldn't be doing this, I should be doing some other thing,
Mm,
that may not bring you the same amount of joy.
yeah.
I was thinking about like Norman Rockwell. Norman Rockwell, incredibly successful illustrator. He was troubled by the fact that he was in a lot of ways out of sync with fine art of his time, right? What was going on in the art world in the 50s and 60s when he was at his peak was couldn't have been more different than the kind of art that he made. And I remember he did that one painting where I think it's called The Museum Goer, and it's a guy looking quizzically at a Jackson Pollock, like a guy in a business suit, and he's kind of looking at it sort of upside down. Well, what's interesting about that is Norman Rockwell painted a Jackson Pollock painting in that illustration. Like the middle of it is this he had to make it. And he actually really liked doing that, but he knew he couldn't do that. He couldn't suddenly become like an abstract expressionist. That would be insane. But I think he wrestled with, am I allowed to be doing what I'm doing when it seems like I'm hopelessly
Yeah.
square in my day, to be doing this thing? And there's obviously still an audience for that, and he continued to make a go of it. But I think he did wrestle with that idea with, am I supposed to be doing this? Is it okay to be doing this? And I think, I mean, there are actors, for instance, who may take a certain role because they get paid a lot more money to be in some commercial film, and then they are successful at it. So then they keep getting offered roles to play these commercial characters, and they say, yeah, and eventually it just becomes habit. Like, okay, I'm always going to be in romantic comedies or in action films, whereas I it's not really what I want to be doing, but I guess I'll make enough money so I can afford to go and do off Broadway shows now and then. So I think that is something that people wrestle with. But I want to dial it back to when we're first learning to make art. And
Mm.
I think when we're first learning to make art, we do study much more carefully and deliberately what other people do, right? Because we say, what does this person do?
Yes.
This is art. I should be doing something like this, right? So you look at it and you go, okay, I should, for instance, be able to draw and really realistically. I should be able to depict reality in almost near photographic terms. So let me study people who do that. Let me try and do that. Do I actually want to do that, or do I think that that's what drawing is? That's something I have to come to terms with. But also, I think over time we absorb these different influences. They become part of who we are, like we were talking about earlier. And then you start to say, well, where am I in this? And also, what is my style? I have people write to me all the time. How do you get to have a style? How did you get your style? And I think, okay, that's like asking me, like, how do I dress this way? Why do I cut my hair this way? Why do I wear, why do I sort of put my stuff in my house this way? You know, it's because this is who I am. This is what I like. These are the things that I've cherry picked from what other people do, and I've made them my own in some way. I'm influenced by Ronald Searle. I'm influenced by David Hockney, and I'm influenced by Robert Crumb. Those are like the main people. They don't really necessarily have very much to do with each other, but those people have kind of blended into me and who I am. And I'm not really like any one of them, but they help me to find out who I am like. So
Right.
now when I do a drawing, it just looks like my drawing. It just looks like that's the way I draw. And when I use Procreate, it looks a bit different. And if I spend 3 hours on a drawing, it looks a bit different. But at its heart, it's all me. But it's not because I tried to do that. I just find that that's how I draw. And I'm sure that you feel the same way, that that's how you draw. And you could perhaps do imitations of other people and draw like somebody else. But ultimately, what happens is as you draw and as you practice drawing over time, you become less self conscious and more fluid and confident. And I would say authentic, more authentically you. And you're less the influences that you wear on your sleeve, and you're more just this weird amalgam of stuff that is affected by everything that's happened to you in your life. And that is the most interesting thing. But it's not something you can
Hmm.
necessarily set out to accomplish. It's just kind of where you get to. And I think of it like jazz musicians. When you're first starting out as a jazz musician, you have to learn the basics of playing the instrument, and then you have to learn the basics of how improvisation works, and then you get influenced by all the people who you admire and the people you play with, and then eventually you just have a style, and when you blow into that trumpet, everybody knows that's you. you know um, but years earlier you may not have sounded like that.
Right. So part of what we do, though, by studying all these influences, is we're building up that toolkit. You're building up that toolkit so that the mechanics of doing it are more out of the way, where
Right.
you're then able to make choices of what you do as you play that trumpet. And so that
It's
allows you
seamless.
to
You can't see the connective tissue. It's seamless. It's all blended together. It's fluid,
yeah.
and it's you. Yeah.
And that ability to to play that trumpet with that style, that came from that person put in a bunch of scales, and that person studied it, and that person struggled with these things, and that person had influences and copied them, and then had influences and copied them, and liked the way that that sounded, tried to do that. And but because you just keep at it and you keep at it, your brain then changes its shape. It wraps around this new skill.
Right.
And yeah, the style then is not a decision. It's something that happens to you as a result of the influences of all of these different factors in the work and the scales and the time that you put in. So I'd say that worrying about your style is probably is not a good place to expend calories, um, because if you just keep going the way you're going, you're going to arrive there. And but and don't worry that studying, being inspired by somebody and kind of trying to kind of like I want to get, what are you doing with to make those rich colors over there? And you can take classes and these sort of things. It doesn't turn you into a clone of your teacher. It's just putting more things in your quiver. And then you, down the line, you're deciding to express some of those and deciding not to express others. And that style happens. Um,
I think I mean, I would call it adolescence. It's like when you're a teenager, every teenager does this. They're like, who's the cool kid in school? And you want to buy a pair of shoes like him. And you have an older brother and, he uses certain words. And so you start to use those. And then you see like a movie actor and you like want to wear a jacket like James Dean or whatever it is,
mhm.
right? There are these things and when you're a teenager, you're trying on identities. And then
Yes.
as you become an adult, it's not that you stop doing that, but you all those things kind of blend into who you are, and you're just more and more comfortable in your skin. Teenagers are constantly doubting themselves and feeling insecure, and they're frauds to some extent, right? Because they're always wearing a mask, they're always putting on these identities, and then eventually they are comfortable in their skin, and then they don't feel vulnerable in that same way. They don't have to be defensive because they are who they are. And I think when we learn a new skill, we're starting from scratch again. We're starting to learn to walk, and we watch what our
Mhm.
parents do, and then we start to get more influences and then more influences, and eventually we walk away from it. But then we might also say, you know what, I continue to honor my influences, and I continue to look for new influences. You
Yeah.
continue as an adult, you continue to grow and to read books and to observe what other people do and be willing to change, but it's less sort of defining your identity
Mhm.
and therefore your style, right? Because your style can change, but at its core, it's still you.
And that gives you then permission to be a lifelong learner,
Sure.
right? Where you're not also, if you have this idea of like, I've got this style, then that can become a trap. You're talking about Norman Rockwell. Can I break out of this bubble? Will people not like it if I do? If I start playing, if I move from country to rock, people will not like me anymore. Um, but if you are kind of taking the perspective of this is, if you're doing this for yourself and you're pulled in a different direction, then that's exactly where you should be going. And I also like what you said about kind of honoring the influences that you have. That that if you've got um, techniques or inspirations that you've derived from other people, if you, especially as a teacher, if you share those with other people, like I got this from this person, I got this from this person, and I love the way that this person does this, then that also allows your students to say like, oh, you're also kind of, you're scavenging what you find useful from all of these different people, and you're building that into, you're not like, I there's lots of elements in my drawings that I've learned by just copying the drawings of William D. Barry. And when I am in my classes, I'll often sort of point out a number of those strategies. And it doesn't make me a Bill Barry clone. It makes me, I'm still me, but I want to honor that lineage of where these ideas came from to also help me remember that this is something that just, that this evolves, it develops by just being exposed, being inspired, trying new things, and continuously learning and changing throughout my life.
Yeah, the fact that you have footnotes doesn't mean your idea isn't any good,
Ooh,
right?
um, I
So
have to. I'm going to pause for a second because I have to write that down because that's a great. Is
make
that an
sure you make
original?
sure you attribute it to me. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. Uh,
Yeah, because I think when you're a teenager, you are tempted to be a plagiarist, right? You
mhm.
take somebody else's ideas and claim that they're yours. But it's perfectly legitimate to say I have a bibliography. I am standing on the shoulders of giants. I am, but I'm just moving the ball ahead a little bit. That's my contribution. That doesn't make it inauthentic. So, that's part of the process. I was also thinking about there are artists who um, have gone through radical change at various points. I mean, I think we mentioned Bob Dylan. Um, Miles Davis also made that transition to electric, and that was completely shocking. But then I also think about like Charlie Parker, who, when he was younger, he was like an accomplished but sort of not distinctive sax player. He kind of went away and came back. He left the scene, came back after like 6 months, and was suddenly a genius. Like he had, and nobody was entirely clear on what he had done, but basically he had gone away and he had assimilated and he had gone beyond his influences very deliberately, and then he resurfaced as the next level up. Robert Johnson, blues guitarist, same thing, and the myth with Robert Johnson was that he had made a deal with the devil at the crossroads because his playing went from
Hmm.
undistinguished to you know impossible to understand how you could even make that kind of sound with a guitar. And then you take someone like Philip Guston, who was a relatively, ordinary abstract expressionist, I guess you'd say. And then he suddenly came back and he was doing, you know, work that was seemed to be based on strange, surreal comic books or something like that. He created a completely different style. So he was there, right in the middle of the pack of abstract expressionists. He went away and he came back and he was transformed. So a lot of times artists, I think, will go away and do that because they're not succeeding. But I think ultimately what they're really doing is they're really trying to find their voice, and they're trying to find a voice that stands out and that really shows their singularity. What makes you different? What makes you different from everybody else? How can you express that so that people can see and feel it? And that takes some refinement, takes some concerted effort, you know. But it isn't something that comes out of nothing. It right.
That's
The soup has to boil down all the ingredients, and then suddenly it has an incredible new taste. Yeah.
so. Then the approach is not to from the start sort of walk out there and say I have to find my style, but to study broadly, to study widely, to look for different inspirations, to let to take those on and to play with them, and um, and then as you are in that soup, to start to pay attention to what really does sort of inspire you and move you. But if you're trying to figure out what your style is in your first year of art school, that's probably the wrong place to do that.
I mean, it's interesting to look at the art that artists made in their first year. Like, look at David Hockney's stuff from at the first couple of years of his when he was in art school. It's pretty radically different from where he ended up. I saw that in my son too. But here's another thing I would say as a caveat to what you just said, because I think you summarized what we've been saying. But there are artists who are distinctive right off the bat. You know, like you can take Grandma Moses, or you could take Basquiat, or there are people who they have just a thing that right off the bat, like nobody else does what they do. And it isn't necessarily because it's distilled. Sometimes it can just be that you just came to art and you're like, this. And I think that those are people who are distinctive anyway. As people, they're distinctive, right? So you're a distinctive person. You start making art. It wouldn't occur to you to be derivative, but also you don't feel like I have to learn to do art the way other people learn to do art and then I can do my own thing. I think those people are, very rare and few and far
Mhm.
between, you know, um, and they often don't study the fundamentals at all. They just start doing, or they come at it from somewhere completely else. Basquiat came at it from street art. Grandma Moses, I don't know where she came at it from, but she was like in her 70s when she started. So I think you can come in from, and that's what's so fascinating about outsider art, right? Outsider art is just so intriguing because you look at it and you go, how the hell did this person ever come up with this idea of this is a way to make art? It totally works, but wow, like They have ignored the whole history of art. They've ignored everything that everybody else is doing, and they're just doing this thing. And you go, wow. Now, if you came upon that and you said, and you've seen this, people try and imitate Basquiat, and you go, well, you can't imitate Basquiat. You can't. As soon as you do it, it looks like you're imitating Basquiat. Only he had those set of influences that made him do this. If you tried to influence, try and make a Grandma Moses painting, immediately the bells would go off. Everybody say, "Well, I don't know." So then you would be a forger. So that's the thing is like those people who are super distinctive with their styles, super authentic. That's just an incredibly rare gift, and I think that they have to be outsiders to get there.
And should you be one of those people and you're listening to this podcast,
You'd be
um,
a rare beast
well,
indeed.
yeah.
Yes.
So for for that little fraction, I think that there also would be another potential danger in that, especially if you kind of get early recognition for what you do, then people identify you with that. That makes the idea of changing. People then want to see Grandma Moses make another Grandma Moses painting. And if she said, like, you know what I'd really like to do, right? Everybody said, like, that's not a Grandma Moses, right? We need you to make more Grandma Moses.
I think
So
she would
pay
say go. I
attention
think
to
she would
what
say
it
go to hell.
is. Yeah.
She would say go to hell,
What
probably.
that's quite likely. But what is it that brings you alive? And for all of us, wherever we are in our process, um, be willing to um, be willing to go back to that beginner's mind, to go back to things like if you've really developed something really well, like you are the go-to person on watercolor, um, but you're thinking like, I going into oils would be a change. It would be a vulnerability. But in that vulnerability is also a wonderful opportunity for growth.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think if something is speaking to you and sounds like that would be an interesting thing to do, even though you've never done it, even though you probably won't be very good at it right away, um, there's a strong reason to do that, to try this thing because and to while you're doing it, be aware of the fact that something inside of you is calling you to do this. It may
Hmm.
turn out to be
Hmm.
amazing. It may take you to a whole new place you've never been able to go to consciously. I think those are the coolest things when suddenly you're going, "Wow, I just found my medium at this point. It never occurred to me to do this kind of a thing, but boy, this feels really right. This is what I've been looking for." It's like having a complete epiphany that transforms your life. I think it's really a cool opportunity. So, all right, good. Well, we have run out of the hour. Is there something else you want to add before we wrap it up?
I'd love to bring us out with a poem that
Excellent.
I
Good.
think
I,
ties
I,
into what we've been, some of the themes that we've been playing with here.
awesome.
It's the poem Poetry by Pablo Neruda.
Uh-huh.
Um, and he writes, and it was at that age poetry arrived in search of me. I don't know. I don't know where it came from winter or a river. I don't know how or when. No, they were not voices, they were not words, nor silence. But from a street I was summoned. From the branches of night, abruptly from the others, among violent fires, or returning alone, there I was, without a face, and it touched me. I did not know what to say. My mouth had no way with names. My eyes were blind, and something started in my soul. Fever or forgotten wings. And I made my own way deciphering that fire. And I wrote the first faint line, faint, without substance, pure nonsense, pure wisdom, of someone who knows nothing. And suddenly I saw the heavens unfastened and open, planets palpitating, plantations shadowed, perforated, riddled with arrows, fire, and flowers. The winding night, the universe, and I, infinitesimal being, drunk with the great starry void, likeness, image of mystery, felt myself a pure part of the abyss. I wheeled with the stars. My heart broke loose on the wind.
So many beautiful visual images in that poem. Yeah. Yeah. It's also about somehow like finding your place in the universe. It's like you're the jigsaw puzzle piece that fits. You found the hole that you fit into. That's what authenticity is about, right?
Yeah.
That our authenticity is part of like the universe's plan somehow. That like we have to fit in, and if we're inauthentic, we haven't found our place. Yeah.
And to give your permission to fall into that space.
Yeah, yeah, that's a beautiful thought. Well, thank you. Thanks for sharing that poem. I love when you do read us a poem. Thank you. All right, good. Well, I think we are at the edge of overstaying our welcome. So let's wrap it up. I hope that this has been useful to you, and it was fun talking to you again, Jack. So see you next week.
I'll see you next week, Danny. Be well.
Thanks again. Bye bye.